5 years of me drawing digitally, and somehow each illustration still took me forever to finish. Sometimes over 20 hours for a single piece. Meanwhile, professional artists seem to pump out masterpieces after masterpieces without breaking a sweat. Take artists like Mogoon. By the time he finishes an entire 100-day challenge, I'd probably still be working on just a handful of illustrations. So what's their secret? Was it their years of experience? Were they simply faster than everyone else? Or was there something else happening behind the scenes? So this video will be about my journey on studying top industry artists, copied parts of their workflow, and try to figure out how they drew so fast. And spoiler alert, I realized professional artists weren't actually fast for the reason I thought. So when I started looking for artists to study, two names came to mind. First is Mogoon. You might know him for his 100-day drawing challenge, producing illustrations after illustrations at an insane pace. And another is SamDoesArts, who was able to paint stunning illustrations in just a few hours. Different styles, different process, but somehow both of them draw way faster than I do. So why not start off the study by copying their process, since I thought the fastest way to improve was to simply follow the workflow of the fastest artist I could find. So I decided to study Mogoon first, more specifically follow along his livestream process. At first glance, his workflow actually looked pretty similar to mine. He starts with a rough sketch, fine lines, base colors, and rough lightings. On the surface, nothing looked too complicated, so I did exactly that. First is a rough sketch, but instead of drawing everything from scratch, I use a trick called silhouette blocking to draft in the pose, using the lasso fill tool to block in the general shape before sketching over it. Professional artists like Mogoon rarely zooms in to not hyperfixate on details. You could say I wasn't nearly as disciplined. Another thing is that his sketches are surprisingly rough, though parts like the focal structure always stay clear to easier support the next couple steps, such as a cleaner pass over the top, added base color with hints of gradients, and finally render in the rough lightings. So at this point, I was pretty confident with the process. The sketch? Done. The line art? Finished in no time. And all that was left was rendering. Mogoon lowers the opacity and begins drawing another line art? Like what? So you're saying all that was just a part of the sketch? I thought I was following Mogoon's workflow until I realized I wasn't even at the same stage as him. Mogoon wasn't refining his illustrations at all. He was doing all of this just to prepare for his actual line art, and follow up with precisely filling in the base colors. Meanwhile, mine looks the complete opposite. Sloppy lines, leaking colors, and a hit to my confidence. But at this point, I had already spent hours on this illustration. In fact, I was halfway done with my rendering. Starting over wasn't really an option, so I had to figure out a way to save it. Enter SamDoesArts. The only thing I knew about his workflow is that he painted directly on top of his canvas. So I figured, why not? I threw out my original plan and hoped that painting over my mistakes would somehow work. And somehow, it kinda works. But I had no idea why it works and what exactly went wrong in the first place. After finishing this illustration, I realized apparently I hadn't actually copied Mogoon's workflow. I had only copied what I could see. So if I really want to understand his process, I'll have to do some deep dive analysis. YouTube breakdowns, tutorials, as well as past live streams, and compare them with Sam's process. and what I found might just explain all my questions. Mogoon and Sam works in almost completely different workflows. Let's start with Mogoon. What surprised me was that he technically wasn't drawing faster, he was simply making most of his decisions before the rendering stage even starts. Mogoon emphasizes that pros build their artworks on extreme preparation and planning. So all the thumbnails, references, and sketches he prepared were what made the rest of his workflow look so effortless. Because of that, he could rely on clean line art and highly separated layers to make safe adjustments later instead of constantly fixing mistakes. Sam, on the other hand, almost does the complete opposite. Instead of locking everything in beforehand, he treats his sketch as a loose guideline and solves problems while he paints. Sam uses much fewer layers as he paints directly over mistakes, and gradually refines the image as he goes, adding more details over time. At first, I thought they were fast because of their highly skilled workflows, but after looking closer, I realized they were fast because neither workflow leave much room for hesitation. Professional artists appear fast because most of their biggest drawing mistakes have already been made, and hesitation is one of the biggest culprits affecting your drawing speed. The two known ways to minimize this is, well, planning, and your overall knowledge and experience. Our experience generally comes with time and familiarity, so I'll talk more on planning. You don't necessarily have to spend hours planning like Mogoon, but you also shouldn't start a piece with just rough ideas. When an idea comes to mind, experiment with it. Use 3D models to test out poses. Gather references so you don't have to go looking for them halfway through drawing. And play around with perspectives to maybe find an even better composition. Even Sam, who probably already have a solid plan mentally when he draws. But even with enough planning, you could still easily fall into the trap of perfectionism. Speaking from experience, this is probably where most of my time were wasted. Most beginner artists want their art to look good, and a lot of them also wanted their art to look good at every stage of the process, being too afraid to move on until the foundation is absolutely perfect. Let's take a look at Sam. He draws so fast because he doesn't bother making his painting process perfect. If the sketch looks clear enough, he moves on. If the lighting makes sense, he continues forward. In fact, you can even see visible brushstrokes if you zoom into his final illustrations that you would not normally notice otherwise. And even in Mogoon's case, his process is insanely tidy, but still, he doesn't focus on perfecting everything. His sketches, clean structures on some parts, rough on the others. His line art looks super refined on the outside, but noticeably crooked when zoomed in. I'd even argue that his coloring is filled perfectly, but it stays that way until the very end. So it's not that perfectionism is bad, it's that you should try to perfect them on parts that actually matters the most. Although Mogoon and Sam have different workflows, both artists follow a core rule: solve the big problems first. Sam is a good example of this. He focuses on major elements first, like overall forms and colors, before moving on to lesser detailing like hair strands, highlights, and accessories. It's like the 80-20 rule, where 20% of the work gives 80% of the result. This saves a lot of time as you wouldn't want to be rendering the clothes and suddenly leave it halfway to fix some random mistakes on the hair, only to forget your flow after fixing it. Subsequently, Mogoon's style solved his problems even earlier. He almost eliminates the need for post-render fixing and detailing due to his insane planning. The compositions were carefully chosen and the line art contains all the details needed for the rendering stage. So technically, he did solve the bigger problems first, and completely removed the demand for any fixing afterwards. Now that I understood what professional artists were actually doing differently, I wanted to see if I could apply those ideas to a brand new illustrations. So unlike my first attempt, I spent a few minutes collecting references beforehand. It's not a whole lot, but it still makes the rest of the drawing flow surprisingly smooth. And I wasn't constantly stopping halfway through to search for references. While I admire Mogoon's workflow, using multiple sketches and a separate color draft isn't my cup of tea. Since this time, I wasn't trying to copy others' process anymore, I just kept the parts that work for me, while adapting the rest into my own workflow. Especially during the line art stage, I stopped obsessing over making everything perfect. As long as it communicated what I wanted, I'll move on. At the same time, I only focused on getting 4 to 5 base colors down, trusting that I would paint on the smaller details later. From there, everything went quite smoothly. I'd already made most of the decisions earlier, like separating the layers. I could simply focus on rendering one section at a time. Having references prepared on the side also meant that I could stay in the flow instead of constantly breaking my concentration. And finally comes the fun part. I refined smaller sections and added details through painting. Rather than feeling like I was constantly fixing mistakes, it felt like I was simply polishing the illustration. And here's the final result. So did I suddenly become as fast as Sam? Definitely not. But it's definitely faster than I used to be. Not because of any secret art techniques that I learned, just that I spent far less time wondering what to do next. At the beginning of this study, I always thought professional artists were simply drawing faster than me. But now I've understood that they were just spending their time differently. They planned before committing, avoided perfection too early, and solved the biggest problems before worrying about anything else. And as always, I hope you learned something new from this video, and that is all from me. Bye bye!